Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will discuss Chapter 14 of Freemasons for Dummies, Why Freemasonry is Still Relevant.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have three-quarters of our usual hosts. We have Brother Craig Graham from Kalamalka Lodge number 160 in Vernon, BC. Very worshipful Brother David Colbeth from King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And I'm Matt Appel. I'm a member of Mill Creek number 243, and we meet in Montlake Terrace, Washington. So for those of you who may have been listening to the show and that we did the whole series of episodes from the Working Tools Podcast, yes, from the Freemasons for Dummies book, and then we sort of got off on this series of interviews about from people from different groups, which we got onto because it's in the Freemasons for Dummies book. There's a series of chapters about the Shriners and other organizations, but we haven't explicitly said that, I think, along the way. But now we're going to have more interviews coming up. But for now, we're going to discuss Chapter 14 about why Freemasonry is still relevant in a return to the more direct thread of the book, if you will. So I guess I will confess on air now to being slightly underprepared for this episode. So I will rely on my other two hosts. But I guess what stuck out to you guys about the Chapter 14 here?
I think the idea is the title. So is it relevant? And I think to not boil it down into one sentence, but yes, it is ultimately relevant for us and for the world. The core concepts of what Freemasonry is about or what it's supposed to be about. One of the comments in the first section he made is that for men that work long and odd hours with less free time, but they have more control over the entertainment and all the distractions we have. He talks about computers and other things. Now I added cell phones. This was my book. My copy was 13 years old already, so it's already out of date. But I question: is this entertainment? He kind of relates that men have less free time for their things to entertain themselves with. Is it just a word he used, or? And I know he has said Chris wrote up, the author has said from the beginning, literally from the beginning, this is not meant to be psychoanalyzed in detail. So maybe he didn't specifically choose the words like in that manner, but it was interesting to me when it was commented that he was discussing a man's entertainment value, if you will, and is Freemasonry part of that scope? And so I thought, should it be considered part of entertainment or maybe part of education or development or all those things that we might think Freemasonry is really supposed to be about?
Yeah, to try and compare it to entertainment is that's a little tenuous in my mind. I don't know. I've never found Freemasonry to be entertaining. That's, and I don't say that in just disparaging Freemasonry. It's just not something I don't get dressed up and go to lodge to be entertained. I get dressed up and go to lodge for the other reasons, to be a part of something that's hundreds of years old, to, be with friends and meet new people and all of those things that don't happen that frequently or as frequently as they used to. I mean, I think in the book here somewhere, he says, at one time, almost a quarter of American men belonged to some sort of a fraternal organization. Right. I mean, there was a raft of them at the time. Freemasonry was in there with the Knights of Pythias, all the service clubs, the Odd Fellows, and every one of those organizations has seen massive decline. And I think it's interesting at the time that this has happened, because Freemasonry was never larger than it was at the end of the Second World War. And right in the years following the war, was the social upheaval that came along that affected every part of society, still does. continuing right up to the technological age we have now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right after that, he talks about how, it is the idea of Freemasonry and its forms and ceremonies out of date, right? It was created in the 1700s and 1800s. And he commented, in fact, Freemasons often recoil in horror at the very notion of tinkering with anything their degree rituals or rules. And I put a big smiley face and I put Matt's name right next to it.
Excellent.
You two are going to be living together in a convalescent home somewhere, and this will still be a fight that between the two of you, with periodically a thrown dessert to have this insoluble debate between the two of you. I love it personally, but I'm just seeing where it's going.
Yeah, I would argue I might dispute also use of the word entertainment, but the providing value for one's time, I think is sure. Sort of, I don't know if this is exactly he meant entertainment again, but if that is the important part, right? If I can't overcome the value I gain from whatever watching a Seinfeld rerun to go to lodge, then it may not be entertaining. Although I would argue, frankly, some of it is entertaining. Going to having dinner with the guys and talking and laughing and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. There you go.
Yeah, there's many times where, of course, that it may not be just because it's lodge. It may not be the ideal of Freemasonry, but it's when I'm not my mood isn't good, or I'm in a situation where I'm depressed or whatever about something. Somebody's sick. There's something happening in my sphere, personnel sphere, and going to an event or going to lodge for something, even for a practice or even for something, just social time, to be able to connect with guys that I like and trust and all that, uplifting. And I remember years ago when my grandmother had passed, and I hadn't had somebody very close in the family pass really in a long time. And so it affected me pretty heavily. I was pretty distraught. And there was I think it was just a practice for a degree that night. And I thought, I really debated, do I really want to go to this? Do I really want to be part of this? And can I really perform? And I thought, no, I need to go. And boy, by the time I left, if I didn't feel better, it was just great being around the guys and being part of it. And of course, there's some distraction involved there too, but that was important.
It's interesting when he talks about entertainment, that one of the things he doesn't really mention, I sort of in the most recent edition here, but how much the entertainment we've had over the years has changed. I mean, people used to go to movies, used to listen to radio. Television came along, and that was a little different because you had the ability. It wasn't like going to a movie, you were just watching one thing. Television, you had the ability to change dials, but it was still a passive medium. You didn't have any interaction with what happened on the screen. You just sat and watched. And then, in the 90s and the 2000s, when the internet came along, that was a whole different animal, because now you had to interact with it. But it's in a different way. It's not in a social way. It's in a very sort of, I don't know how to describe it. It's a push button sort of way, almost a Pavlovian kind of way, especially when you read about all the ways that online gambling sites try and hook you in now.
Yeah.
Whereas, Freemasonry, again, you divorce it from entertainment, because it's more, you're joining a community, it's a weird word to use. You're joining a tribe where you have, over time you're given rank and responsibility and things like that. So I wouldn't view it as entertainment, but I can see how, the things that he talks about in this chapter, especially where he references Robert Putnam, who wrote a book called Bowling Alone.
Yeah.
Where, Putnam talked about, it was a breakdown in the most basic of social groups, your local bowling leagues, that people just didn't join stuff like that. And it was how society was forcing us apart in very strange ways. He goes through a whole list in the previous paragraph about how, drive through restaurants and dry cleaners and ATMs, and, you just don't have that human interaction anymore.
Yeah. Very.
I actually find I go to a grocery store now. I prefer to go to a checkout with a person in it rather than because mind you, and my wife won't let me use the automatic checkouts anymore because my frustration level just goes. I just those things trigger me. But nonetheless, that's the kind of thing I really prefer to. I don't ever really look forward to eating in a restaurant where you just order off an iPad at the table and somebody either brings the foods and just drops it off, or it's delivered on some sort of a mechanical device, and you can already go to places like that.
Yeah, yeah. Society has definitely become very isolating in its processes, for sure. Even this medium, you would think it would be isolating, but in our context, it's actually bringing us together. I mean, Craig and I have never met personally face to face, but I feel like we built a relationship over these years, and so it wouldn't, meeting for the first time would be exciting, but it wouldn't be awkward for sure, because there's that connection that had been built. And so same thing when we met Steve for the first time a couple of years ago. It was really fun to finally meet in person, but we had already developed a bond, and then we were able to drive it deeper from there too. So I think even these connections, and I think initially in my personal, I really want to believe, well, we all know what Facebook was really designed to be, but as it morphed, I think it was intended to drive connections and to do that. And I try personally, that's what I try to use it for. But nowadays, it's as you indicated, like with the gambling sites, I don't frequent them, but I assume that they're addictive in so many ways. And so the social media is that same way. Doom scrolling is kind of the new norm. And I just noticed, I was talking to the guys last night. I went to a lodge and we were talking afterwards, and I said, when I try to get out of Facebook these days, I always used to hit the back button on my phone, and I'd hit back and hit back and hit back. Literally, it's 4 or 5 times to get out of Facebook, because it'll refresh and bring something new to you, thinking that you might want to see something. Oh, maybe he wants to see this. And then if you're tempted and actually click on that or look at it, it's another 4 times to get out of it. So I need to start going to the home button instead of going back.
Well, and with the social media like Facebook, I've seen it firsthand, because I'm not on Facebook, but my wife is. And of course, in both countries, Canada and the United States, we've very recently had federal elections. Yours was a few months ago. Ours was just a week and a half ago. And it just amazed me, and I understood why I divorced myself from social media quite some time ago, because even people who've been to our house, who've eaten our food here, we enjoyed their company, they just turn into complete a-holes when the subject of politics comes up, and I don't get what the driver is of that, because that's certainly not healthy debate that you have in a community of people. That's ranting you have when you just have a small window and you can post almost anonymously and just say anything you feel like.
Yeah. That whole section on the breakdown of the community, I wrote off to the side of Masonic civility. People would no longer control their behavior simply because it's the decent thing to do. And it drove me down the path of looking up Most Worshipful Rush Rivonia, who's Past Grand Master of California. He manages or runs this MasonicCivility.org program, and so I went and looked at their website to see was there any updates, and then it took me to their like a blog page, and it was a video of 2 professors on diabolically opposed sides of each other, but still were best friends, and their conversation about how they're able to maintain that friendship even though their core beliefs are different. And there were some parallels. It was interesting to see that there were some parallels, things they did agree on, or things that had as core a spiritual connection that they did agree on, but how they implement those spiritual connection, those beliefs are different. And then the core tenets outside of their core belief, kind of like we don't say this is the supreme being, but a supreme being is what we should believe in. So there's some parallels there, and I think the idea of civility is waning for sure. There's later on he talks about practicing religious tolerance, and I added in there political tolerance, just like you were saying. That I don't want to jump ahead, but boy, we seem to have lost, and I think that Freemasons should be able to sit down and talk civilly about almost any topic. We might disagree on something, that's okay, but there's going to be some commonality to a lot of it. But being able to sit down civilly and talk about it is a lost art, it seems like.
Well, I mean, that's one of the beauties of it is that removing politics and religion, at least from the official functioning within the lodge room, was a great thing. It doesn't mean that of course, those conversations get held elsewhere. You would hope, as we basically learn in ritual, that we take what we learn inside the lodge and pursue our personal lives with it outside the door of the lodge.
Yeah.
I just say that out of some disappointment that I had with people I know that were making and continue to make all sorts of inappropriate comments about politics these days. But that again is the whole milieu that's come into our lives and the way that it's affected us.
Well, and he talks about in the next section on disconnecting from each other, how, like you said, we live next to our neighbors. We don't often say hi to each of our neighbors. We don't sit out on the front porch anymore and wait for the neighbors to go by. And we don't stand around the water cooler at work and talk about things. And so there's, you email your workmate 10 feet away in the other cubicle rather than getting up and go talk to them, or you're texting somebody across the room rather than, now in lodge, it's kind of fun to text across the room, but that's my entertainment value right there. But yeah, instead of going up and saying hello or trying to talk to somebody and having a conversation, the art of conversation is also a waning element. Being able to converse with people and ask questions.
Here's a worthwhile segue for you though. Does having a cell phone inside lodge turned on, does that violate the tiling of the lodge?
Big brother.
Yeah, well, I just wonder, we're supposed to be safely sequestered inside lodge. The tiler's at the door guarding the proceedings, and yet we're getting a text, very very quietly saying, "Bring home milk." And I just wonder if that's are we insecure and untiled when we're in that situation?
That's and depending on your definition of tiling, is it not only physically but also spiritually and mentally? Yeah. Very true. Very true. Yeah.
I long ago read about how the opening of lodges is essentially creating a sacred space that we're sealing ourselves away from the world and doing something different. And I agree that sort of having your cell phone out and is sort of on some level breaking that solemnity that comes with lodge. That said, I have been known to bust mine out from time to time. Somebody asks, I wonder if so-and-so would be interested in whatever. And I'm sitting there as secretary. So I go, oh, well, let me find out. And it's probably not the right answer, but it's what I've done. That said, there's a guy in our lodge who regularly gets phone calls from his wife at lodge because she picks him up after the meeting. And he's like, oh, no, we're not done yet. And
yeah. So, or the guys that are obviously not really paying attention. They're scrolling their social media or doing whatever they're doing, and they're really not paying attention. And so, and some guys have that ability to kind of have the simultaneous focus, but most of us really don't. And so,
when you start hearing the sound effects from Candy Crush going on, it's at least just pretend that you're present in the moment.
Yeah, and I will say also, like if we're doing announcements, and a week from Thursday is going to be a second degree at whatever lodge, somebody busting out their phone and putting out the appointments in there, I don't have a problem with that. But
yeah. They were actually, was it, I don't think Josie mentioned it, did she? But that's one of the things that the youth are actually doing, some of them anyway, instead of, I think Jeff mentioned it, instead of Jeff Brunson, instead of having them leave their phones outside or having them turned off, they're actually encouraging them to have with them so that they can put things in their calendar and text mom and dad or whatever. Like I mentioned, that was what we prefer to have the mom and dad in the room, but
that was what Henry's chapter did. They would say at the beginning, before they started their opening, they would say, everyone put your cell phones away. And then they would go through their opening, and then they would say, okay, now's the time to get out your cell phone so you can write down the following things. And everybody would, put down the stuff in their calendar kind of thing. And then before they closed, put your cell phone away. Yeah. So
that's some level they're teaching that. And I think to take a look at, the effects of social media, I think actually there's been a fairly positive effect on, like a lot of lodges have Facebook pages. and certainly a lot of lodges and virtually all Grand Lodges now have pages on the internet too. And I think so. I think there is a positive in that sense that I think people are able to reach out and find more about the organization than they had been able to in the past. And I think people can communicate effectively and masonically using those vectors. And I've heard some other things about Discord, the social media site, not just Discord in general, but I think it's that will gradually improve as we get on. At the same time, there's still a lot. Now it's an easier way to spread anti-Masonry as well. You can certainly see a lot of that.
Yeah, for me anyway, and I'm a bit of a closet geek. I appreciate technology and new methods of communicating, but there's so many now. What people used to say, oh, well, if they like mail, if they like email, if they like phone calls, or texting. Well, yeah, now there's, as you mentioned, there's Discord and WeChat and X and Facebook and app du jour or system du jour. So at least that was one of the tenets in marketing. I did a lot of marketing as a real estate broker. They would say connect with your clients on their medium. So if they text you, text back. If they call you, call back. If they email you, email back. If they send you a message on Facebook, send a message back. I wouldn't be able to keep up with everything across all mediums these days. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he goes on to talk about how those ideas of that social disconnection and not talking with each other on a one-on-one basis, I think spills over into participation, right? And he talks about how there's back then, 13 years ago, there's 58% fewer people. I'm sure it's over 60% or more now. I've even heard that attendance in religious ceremonies, whatever, churches and things are on the wane as well. And so I think people in general aren't joining things.
No, there's, I think, another unfortunate aspect, if you have to look at it, there's a generational component to it as well. Because now we're raising children that are probably going into the third generation of declining. And if you don't see your parents doing something, it's not as likely that you will take that up as well. I went to church with my parents when I was quite young, but they sort of stopped going, and then I never did for years until I got married and went again. But now we've moved and I've stopped going. So these things come and go in your lives. But if you they seem to go into a funnel, and it'll get harder and harder to kind of get back from that. I don't know that we'll ever get back to our glory days of what Freemasonry looked like in the 1960s and early 70s, and maybe we shouldn't either. But that's certainly, if we dust off our copies of Dwight L. Smith again, we can have those discussions. But
yeah, I'm not necessarily looking for the cherry pie and hamburger whatever the potato salad and Sunday brunches or whatever, but the idea of a place to come together, a sense of unity, like you said, the word is Freemasonry fit in, becoming having that place. And I even realized it myself. I was thinking, who are my friends? At one point, I was a few months ago or a year ago or whatever, I was thinking for some reason, okay, what is my sphere of friends? And who do people I know? And it was a little bit striking to think most of my friends are Freemasons or connected to Freemasonry in some way. And I'm actually pretty segregated from other populations. I do have some friends, of course, other organizations or clubs I belong to or people that I know through the community, but I have pulled back significantly. I used to be pretty involved in my local politics and other things. And I've pulled back from that quite a bit. And now I don't know the police chief. I don't know the fire chief. I don't know the mayor. I don't know the people in the business networking group. I don't know all the community like I used to. I've really kind of focused down into Freemasonry, and I'm not sure that's a perfect thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing because it's usually good people,
but man, all that municipal corruption you're missing out on now, right?
Well, and he talks later too. I don't want to jump ahead, but he does talk later about how we are taught and encouraged taught to be better and become better, and then to like you said, take it to the community. And so I think that probably we as Freemasons aren't doing that extra step. I sometimes we get so busy being Freemasons, we don't think we have. There's other people that don't have time to be Freemasons, and we're so busy being Freemasons, we don't have time for anything else. And there's probably a little bit of balance there. So maybe we should be careful about our own concerns about people being too busy.
Yeah. No, it's that's valid, but we've become busy with things that are closer into us, like again, doom scrolling and just spending a lot of time on social media rather than trying to extend our world outward further and get become more involved and more aware people, if I'm following my own logic the right way there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I was going to say something, but everything that I thought of saying, you guys would then say, and then you're too smart for me, darn it. But
you also said you also said at the beginning of this you were the kid that didn't do the required reading. So
yes, Dad. Yeah, no, but it is true. I agree that I find myself having more and more of my friends are Masons as well, and I like to view myself, it's probably not true, but I like to view myself as being the nexus between different groups of people. Like I work at the food bank and I work at Masonry and I do this and that. And I like to think that sort of brings those groups to overlap, but in reality, I don't know. I'm probably not the linchpin that's holding Linwood, Washington together.
No. Well, just find out who is and start talking about joining Masonry then, and you can kind of
there you go. Exactly.
Yeah. I look at it, there's been I went through a lot of changes in my own life about 3 years ago now when I moved from the Lower Mainland up here to Vernon for work. And it was I had been away from Freemasonry for a long time, so I made the determination to come back to it because I always wanted it to be a part of my life. But there was other things that happened to us up here as well. Like we hit the lottery with the neighborhood we moved into. It's just an amazing neighborhood. We've gotten to know quite a few of our neighbors. We've got, there's the active people that hold block parties every summer. We had this past year on Boxing Day, which for non-Commonwealth residents is the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. We had a Boxing Day open house, which has been a long tradition in my family. And I mean, we had about 40 people through the house during the day, and probably half of them were just our neighbors. And that's something that I remember growing up. When I was quite a small child, we had tight neighborhoods, and then when we moved to another area of North Vancouver, we went for years without really knowing anyone around us, and that was fairly typical at that time. And I'm much more comfortable living in a place like this where we know our neighbors well enough that we'll police up mail and look after houses and Amazon packages and things like that for them, and it feels like we've been here for a century.
Craig, what do you think it is that do you think it's truly the people, or is it the arrangement of the buildings? Is it designed as a community? What kind of elements or facets do you think that, because of course the people are important, but without some other reason, then the people would just, you drive into your garage and close the door and you don't ever see anybody. You don't even wave to your neighbor.
Well, I mean, you can get into that argument about architecture, that we went to the front-facing garages as we extended into the suburbs, and that totally changed because now people don't really use their front yards for anything. They use the backyards, but we built higher fences, so everyone's kind of cocooned in there. I live in a neighborhood full of duplexes. And in fact, we live in a duplex. So of course, you have to get to know the family that shares the other half of the home, especially when you're in a situation like this where we're not paying rent. We own one half of the building. So we'd better hope to have a good relationship with the people on the other side. And in effect, we do. We've made great, it's a very quiet street. There's virtually no traffic. We live in an area where there's a high, just in front of our house, we've got an old abandoned railway line that was turned into a trail a number of years ago. It's a very popular trail, so I can sit out on my back deck and about 300 people a day go past the house. So it's an active, busy neighborhood, but it feels very quiet at the same time because I'm not living on a city street. There's a lot of reasons, but I think it certainly changed how I as I got into this, I've only found that my appreciation of my lodge attendance has really benefited from it as well. So, because moving to a new community, I knew a couple of people here, but I thought, no, you got to really, if you're going to stay here for a long time, you got to really build a network, because that's actually the safest thing that you can do. And that's where we've gone wrong, is we no longer feel safe around other people, I think.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, and there's something definitely to be said for, I mean, they say, yeah, communities are safer just in general whenever families are walking their dogs and, waving hi to each other and that sort of stuff, that it makes the community stronger overall and the neighborhood stronger. And now, since I've given my erudite opinion on that topic, it does seem like we're headed towards time to wrap up here our discussion of this part of chapter 14. So, as usual, I would encourage everyone, if you're interested in discussing with us or giving us your opinions or anything along those lines, so please let us know and contact us on social media or make comments on the Facebook or the YouTube page. Man, I'm mangling my words this evening, and so we look forward to hearing from you on those fronts. And on behalf of Craig and David and the absent Stephen and myself, we thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast. Goodbye.